All right, 6:35. Let's crank. Jessica's been around the world and is back. Don't be fooled. That little thing that she's sitting on, she had to go put that together to make it look like she wasn't living in boxes.
I did. I'm moving to a new apartment on Saturday. And so I was telling Benji earlier, I finally got to see my parents a couple weeks ago and spend time with them. I haven't seen them since Christmas of 2019. So it was a really good treat to hang out with them for about a week and then a little over a week. And then I was in Detroit for work for the latter half of last week and got back Friday night. And then realized on Sunday, oh, I haven't even built any boxes yet, let alone packed anything. So yeah, I'm a little crazy over here, but I did it to myself. It's fine. But I'll be in my new place, so I'm looking forward to it. And I love that, Aaron, you're sitting outside. It looks glorious. So want to go ahead and get started. I'm really happy to see y'all here. This is our 5th week, and y'all, next time's our last one, which I don't know, I'm a little bit bittersweet about it, but I'm already thinking about it because I can't believe it. And so I was really appreciative of our last session. I thought it was really robust and all the resources. We got so much good feedback on just kind of all the links and stuff that everyone was able to provide and put on the website. So that's great. And as we approach kind of our end, I know we have a couple weeks, but I want y'all to start thinking about for towards the end, just any overall just overall feedbacks and overall impressions or thoughts of the series. So the cadence, how it was facilitated, some of the logistical stuff. What do you think went well? What do you think didn't go well? If you have something more that you want to see or less, or just any additional comments or feedback. I'm thinking of how to put this. I may talk with Benji and get with their team about making a little survey monkey or something that's super simple to fill out, but just wanted to get y'all's feedback over everything and just to hear your thoughts and stuff. So keep that in mind for next time. So diving in, as a reminder, all the questions and stuff that we're talking about are in the Yellowbird links of the conversation to the blog. And if you want, I put it in the chat every time, but I'm more than happy to do that now. And I will in a second. There we go. And all the resources and everything are put in there as well. And before we start, speaking of resources, I have a couple already. So one is this book. Oh, I had it over here. I bought it last week, and it's by a historian, a professor at Harvard, called On Juneteenth by Annette Gordon-Reed. And I'm really excited about this because she's a wonderful historian, but also being a Texan, and she's from Houston or the Houston area. So it's a short book of essays about Juneteenth. And I know last year, everything with George Floyd and stuff, it became a bigger deal. It is a Texas holiday, and it's celebrated in other places. But I thought it was really good when the slaves were freed in Galveston back in 1865, and they were kind of the last to know. So that's a good one. I will put it in the chat. And then there's another book resource that I'll put in too as well. It's in one of the chapters that we're gonna go over today on page 183 in particular. It's called How the Power of Diversity, or The Difference, How the Power of Diversity Creates Better Groups, Firms, Schools, and Societies by Scott Page. And Dr. Livingston references it in the chapter that we'll talk about. So I'll put that in there too. Cool. All right. So chapters 9 and 10, I was actually, I don't know about y'all, but these chapters were providing even more clarity about stuff that I have heard of and seen and have discussed many times. And even though I was quite familiar with a lot of it, it was still interesting to hear and see some of the perspectives. So I think we're going to have really robust conversation, especially on chapter 9. So the 2 chapters that we're going over today are chapter 9, the moral cost of condoning racism, and chapter 10, the practical importance of redressing racism. And so in chapter 9, which starts that Dr. Livingston delves deeper into the layers of racism, describing how racism violates basic standards of moral decency. And that's on page 163 where he says that. And he goes on to describe and define to the reader the scientific investigation into morality and why taking an approach of apathy towards addressing racism is a problem. And he describes the scientific method and the scientific understanding towards that. And with the focus on the foundations that he discusses. So on page 163, he says, one of the most prominent scientifically validated theories of morality today is the 5 foundations model developed by social psychologists John Haidt and Jesse Graham. And he talks about the 5 basic foundations of morality with the focus on 2 for this chapter is fairness and justice, and who gets to dictate that and why. And following, speaking of fairness and justice, oh wait, it's me, I'm sorry. Alexa, stop. Sorry about that. So I forgot I had it on. So
crazy.
It was totally me. I apologize. My jazz hangover playlist from Amazon Music, if anybody's interested. So he goes on to talk about and define the difference between equality and equity, and making sure that the reader really understands this. And I know that we've been hearing a lot about it, particularly like within the better part of the last 18 months. And based on what he has described, he says the 2 concepts of equality and equity, stating that equality means that everyone gets the same thing, and equity entails treating people differently, but in a way that makes sense for them. So just kind of to get your thoughts as you were reading about that, why he put so much emphasis on this distinction, and how does it impact your thoughts, choices, or perceived outcomes when relating to others, speaking about equality versus equity? Because I've had to have this discussion many times.
I'll jump in. I just want to give him a shout out because I love how he uses the analogy of the crates, because it's such a simple analogy, but just the illustration and how he keeps going back to it, like it's almost like it's like he's writing it for a child to be like, if you're at the soccer game, but it made so much sense. So I really appreciated that. But something that I was really happy that we talked about at CCAD when I was a grad student is for those of us that were, getting a certificate to teach college level art, we talked about equity and how to approach that in our syllabi and how to put yourself in that mindset when you're doing assignments for people, when you're giving them, instructions on what they're supposed to do, thinking about materials, thinking about what technology access do students have and things like that, because it might be safe to assume as a teacher at an art school that every kid is going to have, they're all going to have an iPad or a drawing tablet. And if you assume that, you could like detrimentally, really affect your students. And I was really appreciative that that they put that into our curriculum for our to help us with our teaching certificates. But it was eye-opening, just things that I hadn't thought about before, especially when it comes to technology and how expensive it is, and thinking about equity among students at a school. I was happy they incorporated that.
That's awesome. Speaking of kind of the equity piece, and almost like to what Meredith was saying, it's like leveling the playing field, if you will. And I know that I've been a part of many discussions like with a focus on DEI, so diversity, equity, inclusion, The YWCA Columbus has a really good training curriculum on that too. And the thing with equity is that it's almost like you don't notice that it's not, that you don't notice that it's missing or that it's something that's not practiced until somebody calls it out very loudly. So even in the work that I do, we have a focus on social equity and accessibility. And not only because it's our business model, but also like cities and local governments and everybody are really focused on that and making sure that their cities have that incorporated. So I thought it was really good that he kind of broke the ice, if you will, or like set the foundation with that one. And which led me to the next one, speaking of storytelling, Meredith. Speaking about fairness. So then there comes the point of like, there's equality and equity and then fairness, because there's been talk about just because if it makes it equitable, does it make it fair? So like if you give someone else more, like with the stepping stone to help them see, it's like, well, that's not fair because they're getting more, when that's not really the case in building equity. And then speaking of fairness, he talks about this next section of fairness versus entitlement and how those lines are blurred. And when he goes through the cookie exercise of when Frances always gets more cookies, like that's what she's been used to this entire time. And so now it's like, oh, like Betty gets more cookies now or more access to whatever you're doing. And then it almost becomes like, wait a minute, like that's not fair. Like, how is it that she gets more when you've been so used to getting it this entire time? And I wonder how, if anyone has any thoughts or experiences or how they've experienced that, particularly like maybe like in their work or at school or just kind of in your daily conversations and seeing things. Like I hear like, oh, it's not fair. And then there's this perception, which he alludes to, of perceived fairness, which I didn't think about, because it's like, well, how can you call something fair or not based on your perception, especially when you've been handed something your entire life, or your life has always been a certain way. And now it's not because it's somebody else's turn and it becomes a problem. Just want to hear anybody's thoughts or if they think the same.
It certainly was elucidative that as to why there are white people who complain. I always like couldn't see why people would be upset about people, you know, who about reparations or whatever it was, affirmative action. It certainly was illustrative to me to see, it would be interesting to see how people who think that is unfair would react to the cookie example.
Mm-hmm.
I was going to add in that I think fairness assumes that I understand, you know, what you have and what you need and all of that. It's just so subjective and problematic on so many levels, right? So yeah, I think it's going to be unfair to assume that you know what another person, you know, what would level the playing field, right? Yeah.
I think it requires to Aaron's point, it's like it requires an understanding. Like if you just started getting 2 cookies instead of 3 with no explanation, and you never knew that Zelda was only getting 1 or 0. You know what I mean? Then I could understand how it could maybe feel that way. So then it's incumbent upon the system changers to understand, to explain why the system has to change. But he also talks about there are people who are forever like that, which we didn't talk about last last time, and if folks are open to kind of stepping back a little bit about this idea of like competitors versus but like they'll, no matter what they understand, if you explain it, like it doesn't matter. Like they still like they'll still want to be on top or whatever. But and then there are people who are indifferent, who, well, not indifferent, who are, I think he called them, I forget what he called them, but it's like the folks who are willing to do social justice work as long as something is in it for them. But if you can't rationalize to them why you're getting 2 cookies instead of 3, then they won't support. So now they're over there with, they're basically complicit with the folks who are anti social justice work. Because even though they wouldn't call themselves, let's say, racist, you're complicit in it, because it's not serving you in the way you want it to serve you. So then it goes back to like, does it really matter if you explain it? Because like you still have to want to be okay with getting less. And I think even if you share this cookie or the slope or the box analogy, I think people can get it, but not in like, and theoretically, but not in like a practical way where they sign up for it. Like to say, like I was working with the organization who had significant gender race pay disparities, and they fixed it. Now, they didn't make an announcement about it, but the people who knew. Now, I imagine if they did make an announcement about it, it's like, we've been significantly underpaying all these Black and brown women in this organization for years, and we're going to give them an extra $10,000. I don't think they're like, oh yeah, do that. Like they, no. And so it becomes this, like people, if you tell them they've always gotten 1 cookie and you explain it to them and you say, this is us giving them, we're actually not even giving you less cookies. We're giving them just more cookies. Like we're not even taking cookies from you. Like it's still like, well, I want extra cookies, but we're giving you the same cookies. Like, like they're also getting 3 cookies. And then it becomes a push-pull between, do I like make it known when we're doing racial equity work? Because now I have to manage the folks who feel like they're getting shafted in some kind of way. So it's like this weird.
Do you think like that's I wouldn't say a redemptive quality, because it goes back to like Dr. Livingston saying that he's optimistic about, basically racism can be eradicated in some type of way if we do this work. But do you think, like based on your experience, Melissa, that those people who think like that, well, I don't understand why, or it doesn't matter to them, like that they're always going to be like that? Like there's no, it's like, is it almost even worth your energy to even keep like explaining or putting processes in place or whatever it is, if they're just gonna not even get it?
So I do think it's important to be transparent. I do think it's important to share, this is the way in which we're being equitable. This is why it's important. All of these things, like really explain it. And then also say, we are moving, like you're gonna be on a train with us or like be out. So what I like to say, like when I teach, I can say like, because I teach teachers too, I say, well, you can't say you didn't know. You can't say you left my class and you didn't know. Right? So if we're doing race equity work as an organization, and I'm explaining you, this is the history, this is why, this is the problem, this is how to fix it, and this is why it has to be fixed this way, and that's why it makes sense. And you're still like, I want 5 cookies. Then you're just not fit. You're like, I don't know what to do with you after. Like, you're just gonna be disgruntled employee, which you can choose to be, but we're still going. You know what I mean? And I think that's where that organizational leadership comes. Like, I don't think you should just kind of forget them, but when you put systems in place to say this is what accountability looks like for anti-racist work, they're ultimately will kind of either leave or they'll be asked to leave because they're not staying within the accountability system. Does that make sense? Like, if it's clear, like, this is how we treat each other, this is how we hire, this is what we do, this is what we don't do, this is what our feedback system looks like, this is what 360 looks like, this is like all, like, if we're clear, like, quarterly, these are the KPIs that we're looking at. It's not just quantitative is also qualitative. Like, all of these things, we're looking at how you're a leader. You should be promoting Black, brown, women, like everybody. If there's nobody under your supervision that is doing better, then you haven't met those key performance indicators. And that's just not just women and race, but that's just like in general. If there's nobody like a better person, like a better leader or a better whatever under you, then you aren't meeting those KPIs, which means you'll be on a shifted plan or whatever to get better. And if you don't get better, then, you know, so the combination, I guess.
Yeah, I agree.
Melissa, do you think that model can be applied on a national scale? Or is it basically something that can only be done in small, like in a corporate setting, and then hopefully it spreads out from there? But like, can it happen governmentally and, you know, apply to citizens?
So I think it depends on what you mean. Like, when you say like apply to government.
I guess I'm just trying to take your example and extrapolate that to the United States as a system. And because it's not just in corporations where we have systematic racism, it's in the government and the people who work in the government and the people who are elected by the people who will never get the cookie thing and will always want more cookies. And so, you know, how can we take that, like what you're talking about, okay, this is our standard and, you know, the train is moving in this direction and let's all get on it. And what do we do? I mean, is there a way to extrapolate that into a larger national conversation, I guess?
So I can't remember where it is, where he talks about the percentage of the country that is pro-social versus something in the middle versus like, I hate everybody. I forget the term, but so I think in theory, yes, because in theory, that's what a democracy is supposed to do. We do not do democracy well here, but in theory, it's a really great idea because when you have folks coming from this kind of not royalty, what's the word I'm looking for, where the hierarchy is built in. Essentially, George Washington Harlem was just rich white men that couldn't go up higher than the ladder because after you pass a certain point, you had to be born into leadership, right? Or marry into it or something. But like, if you couldn't find a rich woman to marry, like, you was just a rich man with no real power, you know what I mean? So they had to figure out a way to like, let's create a new system where anybody can be in power. And in theory, that sounds great, but really they just created a system for them to be in power where they couldn't be before. Anyway, so with his idea of this pro-social versus the people in the middle, if somebody finds it, let me know. What he was saying is the folks who are the don't care group, whatever that other one is, they tend to be the ones who are most competitive and are most interested in seeking power, which means they're most likely to be the politicians. So that means they're more likely, even though they're the smaller number of folks, are more likely to be the people who are not interested in shifting the system because they recognize that the system is in their best interest. And so, and what they find is and when he was saying that, again, I think is the pro-social folks are the people who are less interested in authority. I think he uses like Jesus as an example, like Jesus wasn't interested in being in a position of authority, but he was really interested in like more like pro-social, like community invested work. But what he found, what he was saying was people who are interested in system changes and community focus tend to not want to be in positions of power. So those folks tend to not be legislators. They tend to not be presidents, right?
Yeah.
And so then it becomes tricky. So you're essentially asking the people who are going to change the system to not be themselves, because you need to ask them to seek positions of power. And they're like, we don't do that. In the same way, you're asking people in positions of power to go against the system that supports them, and they're like, no, because then I won't win, and that's the whole point, because they're competitive. So it's this weird, like when that section, I was like, it makes so much sense. So in theory, yes, but in practicality, I'm not as optimistic.
Yeah. That was like towards the end of chapter 8, I think. Like the previous chapter where it talks about like competitive individuals like disproportionately wind up in positions of power because they're more attracted to power and they're willing to do whatever it takes to attain and maintain powerful positions. And speaking to like people who are more competitive and dominant are often perceived as being more competent regardless of their actual competence, and often end up being empowered by pro-socials and individualists. So it was like the pro-socials, the individualist, and person of power. And that's on page 156, that final analysis. But he talks about it in this chapter. Yeah, it's pretty rad. Yeah, about 46% of the population are pro-socials. And then 38% are individualists. Only about 12% are competitors. So that small percent is making up the big.
It's running the country. The 12% is running the country.
Mm-hmm.
But that 40 plus, the rest of the 70 something percent are the people who are putting them there. So it's like, that means we got to be thinking about, so that like the pro-socials versus the folks who could be leaning more towards social justice work, but they need to hear a message that tells them that you're still going to come out like good. It's like, how do you sway the majority of the population to be able to discriminate? And when I say discriminate, I mean choose wisely, or the folks out of that 12%, because it's not as likely that the pro-socials and the folks in the middle will try and be in a position of power. So then how do you hold these folks accountable? Because essentially, if all they want to do is win, then you got to figure out, you got to change the playing field. Well, what does winning look like? Winning looks like changing mass incarceration system. Winning looks like changing the education system. So that means you have to make them change their definition of winning. So it's not all lost, but that means we actually have to not just advocate, but like organize.
I don't know who said it, but does anybody know who said power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely? And the system is definitely rigged to support those people who are in power, to keep them there, and just mainly to keep their power, because that's how they're going to keep on winning. And that's exactly what we're seeing play out right now, right? So yeah, I feel pretty pessimistic about that, but I like what you're saying, Melissa, about changing the system, creating more just systems, more just policies that are going to endure beyond these leaders that come and go, hopefully faster than, sooner than later. But yeah.
Yeah, at what point do we, in the Constitution itself, to throw off the chains of tyranny, like at what point do we not, as a society, say to the 12%, you can have whatever it is that you think you have. We're doing something entirely different. I don't know, but with the food system, that's what I almost in ignorance set out to create. I'm going to create my own food system. Everything else has been tampered and corrupted. And so I think I can find enough people who are participate in this way to eat and how to put their dollar where it matters. And I look and I think, why are we still as a society paying income tax? You want to hit them where it hurts, stop paying income tax. Like that's, I am actually convicted about paying income tax, where I'm like, that's the only way where if we would collectively as millions of people say, we're no longer support, I don't even participate in that anymore. That's not even you, whatever that thing is, that little game that you have over there, you can keep that game and keep playing it. The rest of us are moving on to where we all get to stand and see the soccer game, or we're all eating the same amount of cookies or whatever it might be. I don't have answers. That's the thing that I'm just like, when do we decide, when do we say enough is enough? We're done with that thing. I don't know. I don't even know if it's possible, but.
I have withheld my taxes, Benji, and I'll just tell you one little tip. Don't write on the form. You can withhold the money, but if you change that form, they're going to hit you with a frivolous tax return penalty, and it's massive. It was war tax. I was withholding war tax when I was, 20 something, and I would do it again, but I wouldn't change the form.
I think that the trick is who. So when people like cancel culture, when they're like, well, so and so said this and I'm not gonna like whatever. That's just no longer being a patron, right? But actual boycotting is saying, I'm not doing this until you do this, right? And I'm willing to sacrifice this. So if that's the goal, then we have to ask ourselves if withholding income tax means we want what, right? And then what not only do we give up, but what also, who else gets put at risk when we do that? And I don't really know how all that income tax and stuff works. Like, I don't know exactly what pot it feeds into, right? But let's just say, I'm making this up because I don't know, and I probably should know, but I don't. But let's say income tax feeds into, no, that doesn't feed into schools, but let's just say it does. Property tax feeds into schools, but let's just say it feeds in, let's say it does. So that means you might be compromising your neighborhood school and the access to materials. And depending on the neighborhood you live in, if it's a nice neighborhood, then maybe that school won't feel the brunt of that. But if you are living in a neighborhood where that school is already underfunded, now you're compromising not only the lives and the livelihoods of those folks at that school. What system will you put in place to make sure that they're not compromised, but you still reach their goals? Like it becomes super complex. So even with like the Montgomery bus boycott, like, yes, they were boycotting the bus system, but that whole community created a transportation system so that people wouldn't be lured to get on the bus. Like, they had a system to get people where they need to go. So we know we're putting something at risk, but we're putting something else in place. I mean, they did that for almost 2 years. So then the question is like, how much work are we willing to put into that to make sure people aren't suffering?
Yeah, and how far are you willing to go? You like, in terms of your personal sacrifice, are you willing to go to prison? Are you willing, and that's where I had this thought today, and I don't even know how it registers. It was coming out of reading this, but it was, what if you told everybody in the country that if they didn't take a salary for a year, that racism would be eradicated? Who would be willing to do that? But then and it was kind of on this equity thing. What if you said that only white people, if you just didn't take a salary, that racism would be eradicated? Then the third one was, what if what if everybody, all the white people were told, all of your salary is actually going to all the people of color for 1 year and racism will be eradicated? Which level would you still be willing to participate as a white person in, if any? And I'm just like, and that's where I'm like, okay, well, what are we willing, how far are we willing to go? Because it seems like historically, the people that were willing to go all the way were not the white people. And how does it change until white people are willing to go all the way? Not that there isn't any, but you know what I mean? That was kind of how that was to me, that was like what the text was saying in some regards to me, and just kind of like moving my heart to like, this has to be, Jesus was used in here. Like Jesus was killed, not because, basically because he was saying to the people who said, here's how you have access to God. He was saying, nope, everybody has access to God, except for the people who think that they are the only ones that have access. And that's what got him killed. And, it's like, well, I just look at that and try to feel how that translates to the time that we're in and what, it feels like something massive has to happen.
People don't be thinking about Jesus as an activist, and he completely was. Whether you are Christian or not, like he was here to burn the system down.
Yeah.
Like that's exactly what he was. But he was technically, and I think people forget that Jesus wasn't Christian. There was no such thing as Christian. He was a Jew, and he was very intentional about letting everybody know he was Jewish. That's the only reason he was killed, was because he was Jewish.
Yeah.
Because he was breaking Judaic law. If he was a Gentile, then he probably wouldn't have been crucified, because there's a whole nother set of laws for him. So to me, that's like the essential, like the story that aligns with white supremacy. Like, what does it look like for someone who is in a position of privilege to go in the system and break down the system in which he could potentially, like what you could potentially benefit from? And he's just like, nope, I'm breaking all this down. And he ultimately died because the people in power did not want to lose power.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we folks are really tied to power, like everybody in some way. I think we might forget that sometimes.
Yeah. And also, and it's like alluding to that same thought, and like these same thoughts, he goes on to talk about like how people find it hard to believe that racist practices and systems established in the past are linked to present impacts. And it's almost like people have blinders on and they don't see that. The concept of reparations, for example. And Dr. Livingston wrote on this, like, I don't know if anyone else has found it challenging with people that they've talked to or things that they experience of not linking, okay, why, when we talk of like systemic racism, all of this, and like police reform and all of this stuff, that like, they don't believe that racist practices and systems like put in place back then are in place right now. Like if you think about redlining, for example, and really talking about how white people really benefited off the backs of Black people, especially in the past, like with slavery, and that white benefactors may not be thieves like in present day. Like we clearly don't have like slaves that we did in the past, but they're the beneficiaries of that theft. And then it goes back to the whole perceived fairness, equity conversation of, well, I've always had this. I didn't take it. It was just always there, but they're the beneficiaries of that. And I was trying to go through the book because I think it's in one of the forum talks where he talks in depth about discussions he's had with basically paying me back, like how their white friends don't see, like, oh, like, of course, like your family stole from me, so I, get X amount of dollars back, like generational wealth, for example. And he talks about it in the book in one of the forums. I'll have to find it and put it in the blog. But and then also like the lack of concern. So it's like if we are gonna, do all these things and put in place and practices of to dismantle these things that we're seeing, like, is there even like a concern? Like, that kind of goes back to this previous chapters of why should people care about it, and how it's implied to combating racism. But I thought that was so, I don't know, like almost bold to bring it up in a way. I know there are a lot of bold conversations and things that he's placed in the book, but to really talk about white theft and being benefactors of that theft, even though they didn't do it, I thought was just, it took me by surprise because it was very forward and in your face. That was all in that chapter, I think, unless anyone has anything else on that chapter. I thought our conversation was so good. When he goes on in chapter 10 about the practical importance of redressing racism, and I had to read this again because the title again, and I'm like, so what does redressing mean? Like, that sounded really dumb with me like reading it. It's like I probably should know because it's simple. But really thinking about the importance and practicality of why that's important. And in this chapter, he starts to delve into diversity within organizations and groups and teams. And that one of the things that he called out starting on pages 185 through 187 is that we get so stuck on diversity as a demographic, not as in thought and background, and how that contributes to this collective intelligence that he wrote so eloquently about. And I just get curious of, okay, how is it that, is it taught that organizations and bigger corporations or smaller businesses, like you meet a certain quota of hiring a person of color or women or whatever the case may be, but then that's it. There's no support for them. There's no resources addressing, like, I come from a different background, or I'm, probably one of the only people of color here. What does that look like for me? And having conversations around that. And I feel like I don't have the answer to that, because there have been many times where I've been in a place of work and I'm the only Black person there. I'm the only Black woman there. And so it's, looking back on it, it's been a challenge when I think about, okay, I didn't really have the support that I thought I would have. So I just had to navigate it on my own. And am I being appreciated for my contributions that I bring to the table, and not just looking at me as a demographic? So I liked his approach to that. And I don't know if anyone had any other thoughts on those practices within groups.
So there's a couple things in this chapter, and there's one from the other chapter that I forgot that came to mind too.
Yeah.
What I have an issue with this diversity of thought, and that's because people tend to use it to not really consider the importance of demographic diversity, because DEI work is a social justice effort. So to me, it has to be both. Mm-hmm. Women have traditionally been cut out of the workforce, and so we are intentional about hiring women. And we are hiring women who are qualified and who have different ways of thinking, because there are women who come from different backgrounds, and there are women who are educated in different ways. Like, he talked about the architects and the etymologists or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Etymologists.
Like, you can also get female etymologists right? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think it has to be both, because what I find with organizations who want to do diversity of thought, it's just, now we just get, you know, white men from New York and Texas. And it's like, it's not how this is supposed to work. It's like, but they're different. Like, one is from the South and one is like, I mean, yes, and we should be thinking about, like, there are also non-white people or non-men who also live in Texas, that you can, like, you can do both at the same time. And I think, so that, I don't, like, so that is problematic for me. And, well, that was your question. Then I won't move to the next thing.
No, go for it.
So two other things I thought was really interesting. One, this idea of white liberals being the orca trainers. I was like, that felt like, yes, that is it.
Yes.
That is it right there. And then also experiencing white people doing DEI work in order to get legitimacy from other white people. He says that in 191, which I've also seen. And so both of these things, or all three of those things, are grounded in some combination of like dehumanization, like savior mentality, and like this like self-centeredness. And folks don't always see that, because essentially they want to be like, well, look, we're so excited about inviting a diverse group of folks. Like, I'm willing to be uncomfortable because now we're intentional about getting these white men from Texas. And it's like, okay. And then there's like, we are orca trainers. Like, we went to school to do this work. Like, I did Teach for America and like AmeriCorps, and I did all of the things. I marched on Washington, and I did all of the things. And I am a proud orca trainer. But what they don't realize is they are essentially working to sustain the SeaWorld system of white supremacy. It's like, actually, we need you to just like burn SeaWorld down and like grow some tomatoes or something. Like, we need you to do something else. But they were like, no, I'm invested. I'm too invested in SeaWorld. I told you I did all of this. I did Doctors Beyond Borders, and I did all of the things. I'm too invested in this. You're asking me to just erase that. And it's like, so you care more. So what's coming out is you care more about you being able to say you did all of the things than you actually disrupting the systems that you say, or disrupting the oppression that you say you're working to eliminate. Like, you're more interested in people being like, oh, that's great. You like clean kids' teeth in Kenya? That's amazing. Like, okay. But how did that, like, did you actually work to get an infrastructure for them to have like dentists or like better health? Like, no, you instead just want to keep going back and saying.
Well, even if the intentions are right, like, let's just say they go to Kenya and they do great work on the kids' teeth, and it's coming from the place in their heart that is the purest place it can be. It's still, if it doesn't cost them anything, then it still is just out of your abundance. Like, it's still, I've got plenty of money to go to Kenya, and I've got time to take vacation, and I've got whatever, and I'm going to go do great things, but I'm just doing that. It doesn't cost me anything, really. I mean, maybe I could go to vacation somewhere else instead, and that's what it's costing me. But ultimately, like, where you live, it just keeps, like the person who has all the orca training, like, you're only willing to go so far. You're not really willing. I mean, you want to do better, even maybe, but you don't want to sacrifice your lifetime of training of the orcas to go grow tomatoes. And that's where I just keep looking, and I'm like, man, that's where, how do we I love the burn the system to the ground thing. SeaWorld, burn SeaWorld to the ground. Jesus, burn the temple to the ground. I mean, I just don't know what it looks like, especially in a peaceful way, or does it have to be peaceful? That is like, not violent, I'm not saying that, but like where it is disruptive to a point where it is absolutely turning something upside down. And that's where I'm like, okay, like that, where's that line between these are people with just good intentions that have a little bit of extra whatever, and they're giving that, versus I'm laying my life down for this thing. I don't know the answer.
I mean, I think there's this weird, there's like this line between ally and accomplice. Like allyship is like, you're likely not sacrificing much. Like you're sacrificing something. So if you're going to go, fix cleft lips in Thailand, like, I'm not saying that's not bad work. Like that's ally work. You're not sacrificing anything really significant. Maybe the plane trip, maybe your summer, but you're not going, like, it's not compromising your life in any real way. Whereas accompliceship is something where there's going to be a significant shift, and that's not, work isn't for everybody, right? And everybody can't be an accomplice for everything. And so I'm not saying don't do Doctors Without Borders, but I think if you're going to do that, then you need to be clear that I'm actually not trying, like, you have to just remember and say to yourself, I'm actually not trying to work towards an infrastructure to make sure this country has doctors, like has an operating healthcare system. That means they will be forever dependent on my volunteerism. And as long as you're clear on that, then just know. And so that means whoever's running, so to me, the accomplices are the folks who have the power to kind of shift that, right? So whoever is over Doctors Without Borders, what is the work you're doing to make sure Romania or Haiti or whomever, like, how are you using your power to ensure that doctors that are Haitian, that are Romanian, that are whatever, can live and work and service their communities? And you essentially, I feel like nonprofits should be in the job of eliminating themselves. Like, you should be in the business of eliminating yourself. Otherwise, you're an orca trainer.
Meredith, did you have something? Your little hand was up.
I'm just sitting here marinating because I used to work as a zoologist, and like SeaWorld has been dismantled. Like so it's like I was sitting here thinking, like, so if a bunch of people could see blackfish and freak out, could they watch the 13th Ava DuVernay's like mass incarceration documentary and like freak out in the same way? Because like it would just be so interesting, like thinking about Dr. Livingston's approach to psychology and thinking about like how can we tap into that same psychology of when people see blackfish and they freak out about the orcas. It's like, can you learn about X, Y, and Z about our country and oppression and racism and have that same fire to change your actions? And because SeaWorld is crumbling, like people don't, like when I worked as a zoologist, we would go there and visit. When I worked with Jack Hanna, the shows, there was like 25% of the people in the stands. There was like, their sales were down. People were losing their jobs left and right. So it's like, if people could have that same fire to like break that down, like why? That's what I was thinking about. That's why I was raising my hand. Is like, how cool would it be to see that same fire in other people with what we're talking about?
Mm-hmm.
I saw Blackfish and 13, and I listened to this webinar or this meeting with Bettina Love. She's a teacher, and she said, we as America, we can talk about race, but we'll talk about them in segments and like time, and so I think for some people, when they watch 13th, it still feels like it's something that happened before, because there isn't, like with Blackfish, you saw the girl, like that girl, you know, was just here last year. You know what I mean? Like if you saw her right when it came, you know what I mean? Like that girl, like her, like we see her. Now, I think if 13th was a bunch of like people following these folks, you know what I mean, through the carceral system, instead of like intellects talking about it, then maybe that would shift things. But I think the way the documentary is shown up, I think that's one thing. And then also, we've definitely demonstrated that we care way more about animals than we do human beings. I mean, you can kill somebody and not go to jail, but torture a dog. PETA will have your head on a stick. You know what I'm saying? Like get a mink coat and your life is ruined. But you know, qualified immunity or whatever, you can be George Zimmerman and kill teenagers, still be around. But if you let George Zimmerman had killed a dog for no reason, like just went in someone's yard and like slit the throat of a Cocker Spaniel, like people would kill him. I swear to you. I promise they would. The same way they did with
Michael Vick.
Michael Vick.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
I was literally thinking about that football player.
I promise. Let George Zimmerman had just like cut a chihuahua's face off. Like it would be over for him. But you can kill a human being and still be around. I mean, that speaks volumes.
It does. This has been so great.
Hey, this is random, but if we're to the prayer request portion of the evening, there is actually a death penalty in Texas that's supposed to happen within like this 24-hour segment that we're in for a man named Quentin Jones. And there's a bunch of people that I follow that are headed down there that are, you know, I mean, and by say follow, I mean like on Twitter, that are headed down there to try to make a stand, a last reprieve and all this kind of stuff. But until now, everything's been denied. Anyways, if you carry, if you do something, if you pray or meditate or send energy some direction, that's happening in the next 24 hours. So just be aware of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, we're at 7:32. So, I mean, you know, this is the kind of thing, I don't know if it's this way for all of y'all, but, you know, I'm thinking about y'all a lot in the in-between times of the meetings. Of course, as we read the book, just your vulnerability, your willingness to, you know, look stupid or whatever it might be, you know, together with people that we've never like sat down and broken bread with in person. So thank you for all that, Jessica. Of course, thanks for leading us through this up until now. We have basically been, Leah, it works for me. She'll get this stuff and kind of chew through it over the next couple of weeks. And we've basically been putting out the prior conversation the day before, like yesterday, the day before this one. So those are on our Yellowbird YouTube channel. If you have any place that, or if you want to see it again or think about something that, you know, go back and look. But you can also share that if you want to with anybody that, you know, has been following along. I have a few friends that watch it just to catch up. But anyways, does anybody have anything else? All hearts clear? Jessica, you want to close us with a benediction?
I need my music back in the background. But no, seriously, thank you guys so much. This is so great. As always, I really appreciate your vulnerability. And over the last, this session, which I had a feeling like chapter 9 would be super robust. So I was actually really excited about today, and we talked about it a ton. But I was really ecstatic to see like everyone just taking a part of it. And next time for our last session, like Benji and I have been talking, and I kind of brought it up to him about like the last 2 chapters are basically like application and how to apply like everything that we've walked through this entire time through the book. Like, how does that apply to like your organization, or how does it apply to like the work that you're doing and like all of this stuff. And so we're kind of working through like what that would look like, whether it's, you know, from a Yellowbird perspective or what have you, but just to see and walk through like kind of the execution piece of what all of this means and how we can take it and run with it. So I'm excited about that.
All right, y'all. Have a good night. We'll talk soon.
Thanks, everybody.